wanted to start out with just getting a little bit of your respective origin stories, and I think, a lot of you in the room are probably familiar with how both companies got started, but it'd be great to hear your takes, first-person takes. Take us back to the glorious 80s when you were, you're the hardware guy or were, and you were really on the software development side. What did you guys see? What sparks and little glimpses did you have that gave you the confidence to know that you were on to something big? Who wants to start?
I think way back in the 80s when I started developing software, it was an interesting time in that I would do any kind of programming that anyone would let me do when I started, and then just was sort of developing software nonstop, day and night, just for fun or for profit or for anything. So occasionally people would pay me for it, and that was good. And started doing some interesting things and got some partners involved and grew Pivotal a little bit. But I always felt, sort of the status quo of software development felt a little bit unsatisfying. It felt like things were not really as good as they could be in a number of ways. And that dissatisfaction grew until sort of in the late 90s. I think there were a number of like-minded people who were really feeling like this isn't the way that software ought to be developed, with these really long planning cycles and attempts to limit any kind of change due to the fact that it might introduce something dangerous or some kind of bug or something like that. So the really great thing is that in the sort of the late 90s, there was this sudden explosion of new thinking about how to do software development that really none of the individual pieces of it were entirely new, but they were lots of really great techniques that if you put them together and kind of supercharged them and took them to the limit, you could actually get to a point where you're attempting to change software continuously, which is the polar opposite of where it had been, which is lockdown change and don't do anything, have 18-month development cycles and so on. So that was really the excitement, is that hey, this is actually the way that we can solve all of these problems, and that feeling that there was something, while software development was one of the most exciting and funnest things I'd ever discovered in my life, was something desperately wrong with the way that it was done. And I think if you take that forward, it's really interesting because the early adopters of this kind of thing were the internet companies, the Googles and others like them, and the venture-backed startups and all of those folks in Silicon Valley. But this movement actually started in sort of larger enterprises. They weren't really ready to adopt that back then, but now it's coming full circle. And large enterprises around the world are rediscovering software development in a way, and adopting a lot of these techniques very, very rapidly. So the transformation is happening at such a pace that, having been in it since that origination, it's super exciting again, like right now, to see the pace of change and the rate of adoption of all of these things that we've been working on for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
So I started in my dorm room, mm-hmm. and the initial observation and insight for the company was that one, I was sort of there at the beginning of the microprocessor age, and going through junior high school and high school, reading about microprocessors and floppy disk drives and then hard disk drives, and to me it was all very exciting that an individual could have a computer, right? Mm-hmm. Today that sounds pretty ridiculous. I tell my kids, I started when dinosaurs roamed the earth. They believe me. I like to take things apart because you can't know how they work unless you take them apart. So, mm-hmm. So I get all these computers and take them apart. And IBM was in the late 70s and early 80s dominant in the field of technology, unlike any other firm has ever been dominant in any field at any time in any history, right? And so when IBM decided to make an IBM personal computer, that struck me as like incredibly important, So I got one of these things and took it apart, and what I found was that every part could be identified. There were no, sort of black box parts, and to the best I could tell, it was about $500 worth of parts that they were selling for $3,000, which, to my 18-year-old mind seemed a bit like a criminal enterprise. And then the other thing was you'd go to the computer stores that were popping up all over the landscape, and they had been selling shoes or car stereos the week before, and they heard computers were going to be big, so they set up a store. They didn't know anything about it, and that seemed to be kind of an additional crime. Okay. And so the idea was, well, if you could make one of these things and sell it for $700, right? You'd still have a very nice profit, and you wouldn't need all the dealers and everything. So that's how the company started.
So you dropped out of school.
Dropped out of school, started with $1,000 in my dorm room, and here we are today.
Yeah.
So it's worked out pretty well so far.
Hasn't been too bad. So as you guys look back on your first few years, I mean, it's interesting, you said that the pieces were there, but people weren't really putting them together for this new way of developing software. Do you think that you obviously you had signs, you just mentioned some of them, that this was potentially going to be something big? Were those signs enough for you guys to just kind of like throw it all in and do it? Or do you think that there's some entrepreneurial dumbness that goes along with it also, where you're blind to what the actual risks are and you just go?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of one, naivete. Okay,
It's another word for it.
If you're naive, you don't actually know that there are risks. Okay, so that's a good thing. And of course, if you have nothing, you have nothing to lose, right? I've actually come to believe that most people don't take on nearly the risks that they should, and are generally way too cautious. And so, I think there's a lot of unrealized human potential because people are scared and afraid to take risks.
Rob?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a boiling a frog, the situation. And I didn't know I was in hot water, so I thought it was a nice bath, and so I was definitely naive and learned a lot. It just kept it just kept ratcheting up, and eventually, we got bigger and we needed bigger offices, and the bank said, "Hey, that's a pretty big office. What do you have for collateral?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? I mean, we make money." They're like, "No. How about your house?" And I thought, okay, sure. And so I put my house down as the collateral, and you start, you end up taking risks like that, I think, as an entrepreneur, and you kind of don't think about it because it's just a little bit more every time. And, but looking back, I don't think I would have done anything differently. I think they were good risks to take, and I think we were kind of backing it up with a business that really made a lot of sense to me. And then I think, by working with customers and clients, it makes sense to them, right? And I think that's one of the things about our business that's interesting for us and very rewarding, and it's still true, which is that we work really closely with our customers to make them understand our business the way that we understand it. And why it's important for their business. And I think that's highly rewarding to have that kind of high touch experience with customers still.
So you both talked about risk, and you probably have relatively high tolerances for risk. When you look at the people in this room and the companies that they represent, some of the largest companies in the world, there's a lot at stake here. What tips do you have, what suggestions do you have about how they should approach risk when it comes to technology? Do you think that there is risk associated, a healthy level of risk associated with what their mandates are?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing inside business today is speed. Is become a major topic, and it is so because the slowest time of change relative to the future is right now. Mm-hmm. It's only going to go faster, right? And it's much easier to create new companies, and so all of these companies are working to say, hey, how can we take market-facing requirements that we're learning about from our customers and our users and turn them into competitive advantage and software faster? Mm-hmm. And so, what happens if you don't do it? Well, probably
That's the bigger risk.
Probably not something good. Uh-huh. And so, I think the speed element is driving a lot of what our customers are doing. What I also tell you is I think we as companies all learn a tremendous amount from our customers. I mean, you can have this idea that there's some mad genius sitting off in a corner somewhere figuring everything out. I don't actually think that's the way it works. I think we listen, and we have tons of data, and all of our companies are able to take that information and in some ways intuit the answer mm-hmm. based on the behaviors that our customers exhibit. Some of it explicit, some of it implicit, and take all that, and we create a better product and a better service and a better outcome based on the collective intelligence of everything that's happening. I think that's a far better model than trying to, sit in a cave and come up with the answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think to that point, and then I'll mention risk in a minute, but something that we've always done with co-development with our clients is really pairing up with them in person and building software. And usually the notion of that is that, hey, people are engaging with Pivotal to learn this, more modern way of software development from us by pairing up with us. But the reality is it's a bi-directional relationship. And so every time we engage with a new client, they're actually sharpening us and teaching us through that bi-directional relationship. So we keep getting better by doing that. It's one of the great sort of driving secrets of it's not an intentional secret, but it's kind of the secret to our success is that our customers constantly make us better mm-hmm. by working with us. And we're incredibly fortunate to be in that position. I think the issue of risk is really interesting because what a lot of people are looking at, like, should I take a risk to do this, to do something in a new way? And it feels risky to change the way you develop or to change the way you do, platforms or to change the way you do security. But especially since the new ways of doing these things, new technologies we're using, are generally optimized for continuous change. They're saying, okay, well, we have to go faster, and we have to do continuous deployment. That sounds scary, right? Because shouldn't we be checking it and triple checking it for a few months and then put it into production? What do you mean continuous deployment, right? That seems very risky, but it's actually the reverse, which is not doing it, is where the risk lies. Mm-hmm. And working through all of the learning and potentially some of the pain and some of the breakage to get to the point where you can do things continuously gets you to a much safer place in terms of building software that is resilient and available and secure, because you're testing everything incrementally as you go. And these thousands of small changes are really adding on top of each other incrementally and building along on the safety that you've been building like that. Instead of waiting and putting something huge into a production scenario where you're not sure if it satisfies the users or it really works very well, and you're actually kind of, sort of saying, la, 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 just please work. That old style of development, right? But it takes a sort of a leap of faith to go through and get to the point where you can do continuous development. Security, I think, so that's sort of with technology and with process, how you get to this, continuous deployment kind of a model, which is actually safer. Security is approaches to security are going through a similar evolution, where traditionally IT groups have said, don't change anything, lock it all down, right? And this server's been running for 4 years continuously with no downtime. How about that? There's nothing, we haven't changed a thing on it, right? And I think these days, if you think about a server that's been running steadily without ever having gone down for 4 years, you wonder what's kind of been incubating it, and you're looking for Sigourney Weaver, and something's going to pop out that you really don't like. And the way that you really approach that now is you say, let's take that virtual machine and kill it all the time, and then restart it in a known good state, and have the system rebalance all the applications, and no one knows that it happened. But what you've done is you've wiped it clean, so you can't get any infection that lives there. That's just one example of how approach to security is evolving toward continuous change, right? In order to foil threats and have a continuously clean environment. I think a lot of this, the metaphor or the trend to go toward continuous change feels risky, but it's the reverse. Not doing it is the risky part.
Okay, I have more questions for you guys, but first person to ask a question from the audience gets a free Dell. Or no, I'm kidding. Or a year of storage, virtualization software. What would it be today? I don't know. Something else.
All the above.
Yes. No, seriously, any questions? Raise your hand, please, or just speak up. Yes.
We started the conversation out looking backward, but if you crystal ball 30 years out, what does this look like, both from a software and over?
Should I start with that?
Yeah, go ahead.
How many years out did you say?
30? Well, no,
I was going to ask them 5 to 10, but let's go.
No one
30.
ever asked for 30. That's why this
Yeah.
is such an interesting question. It's
Yeah,
always 5.
I'm looking forward to hearing the answer.
Because it's really been about 30 years since I first started meddling around with software. And the funny thing is, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So I'm going to give a bit of a counterintuitive response, but you've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? And you've got the HAL 9000, which by the way, in the story was supposedly activated in 1992. So that's 1992 technology, right? Well, in 1968, 69, how did they get to what should HAL be? Well, they talked to the folks at MIT and all the AI researchers and said, well, what are computers going to be like at this time? Okay, well, here's what we project they're going to be like. All right, and obviously Siri is not HAL, right? Now we're 25 to 30 years after HAL was supposedly first brought online. So I think people get really, really optimistic about what's going to happen over that time frame, and it doesn't happen in the way that people think. I mean, I think there are threads and paths that go off, and software technology advances really fast in ways that people don't expect. But in all the ways they're predicting, it's not nearly as fast as you would think. So, for example, 30 years ago, I was programming in languages that people still program in now. People still program in assembly. People still program in C. All these things. These things haven't really changed all that much in the way that people do things. And I have heard, from way back in the early 90s, and I still hear today, in 5 years, no one's going to program. It's going to be blah, right? It's going to be completely different. And so I guess what I'm going to say is that in 30 years, I think there's going to be a bunch of stuff that you still recognize. And that's the surprising prediction. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that you still recognize. Because I go back 30 years and I'm like, yep, most of it's the same. And then there's some really interesting new stuff. Answering without answering.
So it's pretty much going to be like today.
Yeah,
What's your take?
I think well, one is, computers are machines. The human brain is an organism. Those are different things. So, maybe 15, 20 years from now, we'll have computers that have more power than 10 billion brains in terms of computational power, but it's still not an organism. And so it does different things. What we'll be able to do with that, I don't really know. I mean, what's always interesting about technology are the combinatorial inventions and the permutations where people say, okay, now you have this and this and this, you put this together, now you can do this other thing. Those are really more business model inventions on top of the technology. But certainly the pace of improvement in all the underlying technologies is not going to slow down at all. It's only going to accelerate, and that's super exciting, super interesting, and I think will generally yield tremendously positive outcomes for humans. There's all sorts of scary scenarios and science fiction movies and that sort of thing, but if you look at the actual results, they've been way, way more positive for humans than anyone would have predicted. I think that'll continue.
Well, as you guys look at what's going on now with younger companies, smaller companies in Silicon Valley and Austin and other tech hubs, what do you find exciting and potentially game-changing out there? It can be an enterprise, consumer, whatever areas you see that are exciting to you. Or is there nothing?
No. So I'm generally a little bit of an AI skeptic, I think, compared to a lot of folks in my field.
Like Michael,
Yeah.
right? Well,
Maybe.
we can get to that.
Yeah, we could. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we fall on the various. But it doesn't mean that I don't think a lot of the AI technology is extraordinarily useful. Mm-hmm. I do. I just I don't necessarily think that they're suddenly going to rise up against us or eclipse humans or have volition or what have you. But I think they're very useful. But I think one of the things that's going on right now that I think AI is, for a lot of large organizations, is used in fairly narrow applications. And people can apply it to a particular type of problem. But what a lot of the large organizations are lacking is kind of the substrate, in terms of platform, process, culture that allows them to connect all of their different applications and all of their capabilities in a consistent way with APIs, with the processes that allow them to do continuous evolution and a culture that embraces that change. Well, you've got all of that there. Now you start weaving in the really interesting technologies onto that, and you can start taking advantage of all of these things that can express their state and their intention to the artificial intelligence technology, and you can take what insights you glean from that technology and you can weave it back into what you're developing on a continuous basis. That gets really exciting. Mm-hmm. And then you can apply these technologies across a large organization in ways that you would never think. Because right now, most of those applications of it are very siloed, very isolated.
Yeah, I think the artificial narrow intelligence is much easier and more promising in the near term. It's much harder to do artificial general intelligence, and I still see all these new businesses being created as people combine things together That to me is super interesting. And of course, what's happening is IT, as some of our customers have told us, has gone from a chore to core. And you can't actually do anything without IT. You can't design a product, can't have a customer relationship, buy, sell, whatever, big company, small company. So, the role of what we all do collectively together has gotten way, way more important, and IT is sort of broken out of IT, right? And then when you think about this whole topic of digital, it becomes core to how an organization thinks about its strategy, how it evolves, how it serves its customers, and so it's center stage in the evolution and strategic thinking of a business, and that's a big deal whether you're a big giant company or a small company, and everything that is has the potential for some super big change also can be overhyped, right? And there will be mistakes along the way.
Other questions?
Could you please elaborate a bit about ecosystems? Because I think in the past, companies tended to employ people in order to ensure that they have the entire value chain completely in their hands. I think now with your products and your software, we are more talking about marketplaces and combining solutions. Or will this continue in your eyes?
Yeah, I think so very much. Being a platform company, essentially, we're absolutely reliant on having a vibrant ecosystem, and I think it's discussing recently. It's kind of as a company that's building up to be a platform company. If you take us back 4.5 years ago, it's a chicken and an egg situation. You really need an ecosystem and a lot of partners and systems integrators and ISVs to come in and make your ecosystem rich. But until you have momentum, it's hard for them to come in and commit to that. And so we really, I think, spent a lot of effort working for the first few years and eventually gave live birth to a chicken, and now the eggs are appearing. It's a bit of a strained metaphor, but
That was beautiful. Yeah.
but now the eggs are all hatching, and
Oh, you're just going to keep going with it?
we're chicken. I'm not going to let it go. But that ecosystem, I think, we've recognized the importance of that ecosystem for us as a platform company, and I think we see that in other open source communities, and then we see that the really interesting thing is we're very open source based ourselves, and you see these communities start to merge and have convergent evolution and swap bits of DNA, and it gets really interesting. So I think in an open source world, the ecosystem just becomes doubly important.
Yeah, it's back to the speed, and it's easier to connect things together. So you can do it in a community ecosystem fashion. So yes.
Other questions?
Yeah. So how long will you think that it takes for a larger company to go and move from where they are into this modern world that we're talking about? Because it's a massive challenge for a big company to move from that spot to this spot.
Yeah, it is. Well, we've seen some companies that are doing it, instead of moving from 0 to literally 50% of their development done in an entirely new way with the new technologies. Really, essentially, a transformed organizational structure. So a lot of the roles that they previously had have gone away or have morphed into new roles in a new organization, which actually, I think, leads you to the how of that question. Sure, it takes several years at least to get to a 50% level, what we've seen. But in order to do that, you might need to create a new organization, and not try to simply modify the old organization, right? Or try to infect it with a virus and hope that it spreads. But you actually have to create a new organization and start pulling things in, both from the outside and from the old organization, and building that up until that's the new normal. And that's one of the ways that you can actually achieve that transformation of all of the mechanisms of software development and the way that IT is structured and the way that product groups are put together that have adopted all of these new things, Agile and Lean and DevOps and design thinking and all of these things put together in a new organization with new roles. So,
Have you guys seen could you share some best practices out of what you've seen in companies that have made that transition relatively fast, especially as it pertains to the cultural change and organizational changes, like you mentioned, side of things? Anything that you see that seems to work universally?
I'm not sure if I could claim universality. Well, we're definitely seeing a lot of really good patterns. In addition to potentially creating a new organization and building that up, I think there's also really from the start kind of adopting a beginner's mindset instead of saying, okay, I'm gonna let everything go and work with other people that have done this before, and then based on that start propagating that. So oftentimes when we work with people, we say, hey, work with us at first to do things in a new way and learn how to do this, learn how to use this new technology platform and so forth. And then we step back and go out of the picture, and hopefully that group within the company actually acts as the change agent now. So they go on a self-sustaining transformation. And they then have to ask the rest of the organization to suspend their disbelief and come in and try things with a beginner's mind and do that again. So that's kind of a pattern that you see over and over again, is imploring people to check their ego at the door, forget everything they've known just for a while, right? And try something in an entirely different new way. And then once you've internalized it, you could sort of then synthesize that with everything else you know into something bigger, and that's your own, right? So that's another pattern that I think we've seen a lot of.
Any thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen and what we've done inside our company is, that's worked well, very similar to what Rob is saying, is you spin up 2, 3, 4 teams as kind of a separate thing off to the side. You get it going, and then you go back to the main organization, you kind of call for volunteers. Hey, who wants to be part of this new way of doing things? You'll get maybe, 25% or a third will say, yeah, sign me up, right? And then you gradually start moving the whole thing that way. And that's a pretty tried and true method to get it going.
Yeah.
But
I'll elaborate on that because I've seen the way that Michael talks about it to his teams, which is really powerful. And it's a really strong executive statement, right? Of, hey, we're going to do this new thing and we're going to do it wholeheartedly, and we're really going to try it, and you have my full backing to do it, and that is another pattern that's really critical, is that support, really strong direction from the top. If you go back to when we were working with Silicon Valley startups for years, and some of them really took off, and some of them kind of worked with us and did things in this new way, and then it sort of entropy set in and they started going down. And usually what happened was, deadlines would come up and scary things would happen, and maybe the CEO would say, yeah, I know you're writing all these tests, you're doing all this automation, but we really have to ship next Tuesday. Can you stop writing tests until after you get into, I swear I'll give you more time after. I'll give you extra time after we ship to write tests. That kind of fear reaction, it just destroys teams faster than you can imagine. And so I think from a leadership perspective, you got to come in and make that really strong statement of support when you're trying to move onto something pretty radically different.
Okay. Very quick question.
Yeah, just a follow-up. I think, Michael, your example about giving the blessing or the permission to pilot the prototype something, how many rules do you allow them to break? Do you let them to like completely go off the edge for how they hire, how they bring talent on, how they do contract negotiations, or do you draw lines somewhere?
Well, you know, we adopted the pivotal methodology in terms of hiring and screening talent because I observed, you know, a different level of talent inside the labs than you know, folks that had a lot of three-letter acronyms on their resume but couldn't actually do the work. So, you know, that was pretty much a copy exact of the pivotal model. You know, every company has its own unique elements. I mean, at our company, if we want to get something done, we tell them just, you know, get it done. If anybody gets in your way, just shoot them, right? You know, not we don't actually shoot people, but we are from Texas, so we use colorful analogies like that. Just make sure everybody knows we're not actually shooting
Figuratively.
people, so. Exactly, yeah.
All right.
But it's, don't let anything stand in your way. And, you know, look, you know, if you're going to do something new, you have to be willing to break things and sort of, you know, make stuff happen. I mean, that's just,
All right.
because you know, you know, if you have a big company, there are a lot of people running around to tell you can't do stuff. Right?
I think we're out of time. I came away with a lot of like chicken and egg analogy, and thank you for that lovely last note. But thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
we're
you.
Going to, and you guys can go ahead. Thank you.